So, hello everybody. Thank you very much for coming here. I'm Itamar Jobani, co-founder of PayEm. PayEm is a spend management platform. We built essentially like a light suite of products. So we started with cards, we expanded to AP automation, and lastly we got into the procurement world. And we're super excited to host Dr. Elise Epstein here and to talk about digital procurement. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm Eloise. I'm a partner with Carney, and I have been with the firm 23 years now, so I'm an old timer in consulting. And I do digital procurement. I do it across all industries. I do it across the globe. It's the one thing I do, digital procurement and supply chain. And I spend half my time doing strategy work and for the big companies, and the other half of my time researching, writing, and public speaking about the profession and how it's changing. And so I have 2 books out, and my third book, and I'm happy to send you a copy if you don't have one. And my third book comes out in October.
So your last book titled Trade Wars, Pandemic, and Chaos, How Digital Procurement Enable Businesses' Success in the World. So would you mind describing a little bit?
Yeah, so I wrote it during the pandemic, and I really took aim at what I was calling at the time the big lie, and thank you, that you could buy one provider and it would solve everything, or more succinctly, you could buy SAP or Coupa or iValue and it would solve everything, and there's an entire industry around perpetuating that lie. And maybe it's not a lie, but that myth. And so what I came up, I started to see that there's so much innovation, there's so many startups, and there's so little adoption of these big bang tools that there had to be a better way. And so I really designed, and if you've seen my spider map, I wrote a book explaining how the spider map actually works in this modern way. Because, and my original idea very simply was, we need a sales force for procurement. That's what I was saying. So we'd have a core platform and all the other capabilities. And that's the thesis, and that's because today's capabilities, the capabilities we thought we needed in 2019, changed in March of 2020, because all of a sudden, all of our playbooks and best practices went out the window, because we were like drawing it up in the sand, like, all right, you go deal with that. Like, these 300 suppliers just went out of business. What are we going to do now? So we're just drawing on virtual whiteboards, and so we're throwing people at problems, which in a crisis, fine, but there's got to be a better way of working. So that's kind of the thrust of the book.
So I think there was definitely a big change, with COVID, and we had to re-examine a lot of the notions of how to run a business. But now it seems like we're getting back to normal, right? But I'm assuming you still shifted, that sort of like centralized way of thinking about the operation to a more dispersed way.
Yeah, and technically I would call it best of both, where you have some core transactional platforms and you have core capabilities that you add. We have come out of COVID, but we have walked right into labor shortages, other supply chain disruptions, ships stuck in the Suez Canal, et cetera, et cetera. We have a literal war going on the eastern part of Europe. We have threatening of war elsewhere. So the globalized society that we started in 2019, well, it had been post-World War II, that globalized society, which really took off in the early 2000s, is kind of recalibrating now. And so we are having to redesign business operations in every which way. I don't care if you're a bank or a pharmaceutical or a tech company. The way of the world is changing dramatically. And I would argue, and I do in my new book, that really the future is about getting good at data exchange with third parties, and really getting how do we create a much more seamless way of exchanging data so we can get more comprehensive data on risk and ESG and everything else, but also pricing so that we don't have to negotiate. Like negotiating your cloud contract should be easy, because if I can tell you that Salesforce benchmarks are for Salesforce licenses or HubSpot licenses or this, and Oracle's this, and SAP's that, and Workday's that, well, do I need to build up a whole procurement organization to manage that? And so that's where I think digital in this new era is reshaping how we do procurement.
So if I'm thinking about digital, what I'm hearing from you is, instead of like having one sort of monolith that we just making sure that all the data is like pouring in there, it's like, how do we connect sort of like multiplicity of data sources, and that we're making sure that data is flowing between them freely. Where do you see the employees in that sort of like realm of data structures?
Well, so the conventional wisdom is your customer is always right, and your customer is always the most important. But I would argue the suppliers are the most important. And my colleagues would argue that, or some of my colleagues would argue that the employees are the most important. So, because even if you have customer demand, if you don't have supply, you can't sell them anything. But if you don't have anybody to work the stores or to run the business, then you can't serve either. You can't serve the customer or the supplier. So I think the shift to me is balancing more between customer, supplier, and employee. And so that's, I'd answer that one way. And then the other piece is employees, all of us as consumers expect a user experience for one. So if you go to Netflix and I go to Netflix, we're going to both watch something tonight. Your experience in Netflix is going to be different than mine. So what, did Netflix design something for you? And then did they design something for me? No, they're using very sophisticated algorithms to track your behavior and intuit and predict what you will like and what I'll like. So when I log into the corporate procurement system, shouldn't I, my expectation is I'll see something like that. Now at Carney, I shouldn't say this because it's being reported. At Carney, we implemented SAP, and I am not about to use it, because every time I log in, it takes like 15 minutes for it to load. And I can't find, I don't even know how to procure something, so I ask my EA to do it. And so that is not good digital. That is not even digital, because I'm having to rely on an analog. But I can guarantee you, I spend a lot of money on Amazon, so I know how to buy things. But that's the disconnect, and we need to solve that.
I think there's also definitely a shift between where we were really focusing on getting the data to that sort of like big warehouse. So the focal point was sort of like IT, that running the show, in a sense of like, how do we get, the right structure of data, where now when the motion of procurement many times is way more dispersed, way more indirect, because everybody is a buyer, like you're saying. And if we want our organization to be successful, we want to empower them. And they are where they at. They are at Amazon, or like they expect to be met where they at. So the question is like, where do you think the tools needs to be focused on now? Like how do you meet an employee where they're at? What are the new shift of the old tools to the new tools?
Well, I'll answer it in two ways. One, I think supplier data will thread all of this stuff together. So it's not, you might have a core system, a platform, and then all these other things, but your supplier data threads it all together. So you have to make sure you have the golden thread. But the other piece is for the employee. If you I work in Teams all day, so if there was a sore spot in Teams and I could say, hey, because my laptop is dying, I need a new laptop, it could facilitate that in 60 seconds or less. I'd just use that, because I'd say, I want to upgrade my laptop, and could say, you have a whatever MacBook Pro, and this is the new model. If it told me that, I would say, buy that. I want that, I'm done. That probably wouldn't even take 60 seconds. But instead, it's like this cumbersome, I don't even know where to log in. I have to ask Emily, my EA, to go find, she's got to call somebody. So the tool is not meeting me where I'm at. So where I'm at is in Teams all day. And I want to or send a text message and be done. And why stand up all this infrastructure
Right.
when what I need is I just want I want the new version of this, whatever this
Right.
is. I don't even know what it is. I don't
Whatever
even
is
care.
approved, wherever
Right.
you're buying it from, whoever the vendor is, like, give me the latest MacBook Pro that I would like to buy.
Exactly, and I'll buy whatever's on contract. If you just like, but think about that. We just solved it in 10 seconds. Like, that's the thing. So how do we communicate? Like, why did Kearney deploy a system that I can't do that?
Right, right. I think what we're seeing is that many times the personnel, the function, the procurement functions are being the buffer in a sense that need to mediate the sort of like the old warehouse or like the monolith warehouse to the employee and have a conversation around it. And I think we spent almost 20 minutes without saying AI, which is, I think,
That is a record for
a
me.
record for San Francisco,
Yeah.
conversations. So, seeing that now we have like this huge shift in the way that probably technology is being built or being assessed, and conversation is part of it. Where do you see that going, or the AI meets Gen AI meets procurement?
Well, if procurement, so just going back to if procurement's buffering that,
Yeah.
that's wasted time and effort, and those people are going to go away because we've seen it. The AI streamlines that whole exchange. And using my laptop as an example, like, I don't need procurement in the middle of that. If I had the right system, because I don't want to go outside the system. I'm
Right.
very happy to use the tools that. So this is not about me being the prima donna that I am. It's me just trying to get my updated laptop, and so procurement should, like, if we do our jobs properly, we shouldn't be like seen. We should be in the background like, think about this. For me to get a new laptop, I don't need a procurement person to touch this at all.
Right.
So, but to do that, we need the ability to understand who's supplying the laptops, and we need the ability to capture my demand to send it to whoever the distributor that's going to send the laptop. So that's the first part of that. The second part, though, is that to do that, we need intelligence. We need the Netflix type algorithmic intelligence that understands, hey, I want a laptop. Don't make me go search for a laptop. That's not my job. My job, like, intuit what I want. Intuit that, oh, you have a MacBook Pro. There's a 92% chance that I want the same MacBook Pro, or the next model. So why ask me a bunch of superfluous questions? And so when I see, and I do a lot of, let's just say, fixing of broken S2P. And the first thing I see is intake forms that are 32 fields long. Nobody's filling out 32 fields. They're clicking the minimum amount to
get away
to get
to
to the next screen. Right. So why are we doing that? We are just shooting ourselves. We are making it more difficult. And so if you could take the 32 fields and collapse that into one question, and then based on that, have a follow-up question. And that's what algorithms do. That's what, okay, I'm going to say it 21 minutes in, Gen AI is going to do.
Yeah.
Like, so that's the promise. And that's what we need to be doing, not designing whatever that was.
So I think, I hear a lot of context, so to understand the context of the request, to let the employee just focus on, what they're actually trying to get, and, and leave the rest to the systems, whether or not they're smart or they're newer. So what is the new role of procurement, or the future role of procurement in your eyes?
I'm glad you asked. Because to me, they're going to be value orchestrators, which is like a fancy consulting word. But in other words, somebody has to architect to know that we get laptops shipped from wherever, to understand what inventory might be there, and do we need more than one supplier of those laptops. And so, great, we put in this little bot, but I need to think through what could go wrong. How can I improve that experience? Okay, so it was easy to request the laptop, but if I don't hear anything back, or it takes 6 months, the backside of that process was makes it equally terrible. And so how do I, like as procurement, we have to stop and step back and say, I'm not facilitating the buying of Eloise's new laptop. I'm trying to figure out how we seamlessly get new laptops into the organization and out. And so in that example, I need to look at the risk management. So whether it's low inventory or who is the supplier that's supplying laptops, and are they doing anything nefarious? Or further up the supply chain, who are they getting the laptops from? Are they getting from an intermediary, a third-party reseller? Who are all these like working backwards? Or in this exchange, if Eloise gets a laptop every 6 months, what's the carbon footprint of that, or the sustainability metrics of that? And how do we start to bring that into the transaction? Because if I've only had this for 6 months and I say I want a new laptop, maybe there's not a policy against it, but it maybe the phone's a better example. My phone's working great, and I'm due for a new phone because it's been 18 months and our time is 18 months, we get new phones. But it could say, if you kept this one more month, you would take a X% carbon offset. Or if you kept it 6 more months, you could keep, this. Like if I understood that, I might make a different choice. And so our job as procurement is to start to bring those components in together so that we understand that it's not about me buying the laptop or the iPhone. It's really understanding that context so we can bring it to the organization.
So it's like almost like from building houses to be an urban planner, like
to be an architect.
To be an architect, to like look at the big picture, to understand the powers that the organization are either operating in or with, and to try and shift the focus over there. Where else?
Well, and actually, can I give you a good example?
Yeah.
So it's like we've been working on the assembly line, and now the robots have come for the assembly line. So we need to be up in the supervisor's booth watching what's happening on the floor, or more broadly, building the network of manufacturing centers, or thinking about how and where we could move them. So we've just changed from bolting the siding together to watching and overseeing the robots doing it.
And where it's going to fail, and
where it's going to fail.
What's the orchestration between them, and what's the infrastructure, the data infrastructure.
Right. So that's our job now. And too many people are still trying to assemble like parts on an assembly line.
Yeah. Where do you, I mean, Gen AI is such a big topic. I'm sorry that I'm coming back to it, but where do you feel is it's sort of like the blind spots of that technology, or the areas that, I mean, obviously in the hype graph, we're right now at the peak.
Oh, well, we're not even close to the peak.
We're not even close to the peak.
I'm afraid.
But when you're thinking 5 years forward, where are the areas that you feel like are the dangerous areas of that technology?
So actually, I think, so I'm going to answer it in a different way, counterintuitively. I think Gen AI is going to do what Gen AI does. Mm-hmm. I'm not worried about the technology. I'm worried about the people, because I think everybody, this is the joke I've been saying all week. I don't want to hear about Gen AI from anybody over 30 years old. And that includes myself. Like, I shouldn't be talking about it. None of us should be talking about it, because we have too much bias and understanding and constraints of the world we live in. I want to learn and understand from people that are looking at this technology unconstrained. So like anybody that's writing white papers and, yammering on in conferences, way too early to be doing it. We're still it's all just hype. And I think it's the people that are the problem in this. So that's one part. Two, I think managers and leaders don't understand it effectively. And that's the biggest risk to me, because so in my new book, I write about Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. They just took hundreds of gigabytes of secure data out of secure facilities. How'd they do that? They did that because the managers had these blinders on and they weren't paying attention. They didn't understand. Chelsea Manning she put tons and tons of data on CD-ROMs or DVD-ROMs and labeled them Britney Spears and Backstreet Boys. Like, nobody stopped to think that, you could just, like, they weren't, like, their job, those leaders, those managers, their job was to prevent that. and they didn't do their job. And while she got tagged for it, they should have been culpable too. Those guys should have been in jail too. So the reason I say that is that nobody in any leadership organization, not just procurement, understands Gen AI. And our job is to understand the art of the possible. And if I could just go on and tell you a really funny story.
Sure.
In March, I think, or April, we had our partner meeting, a small one of the practice I'm in. We had all the partners meeting, and we were sitting in Detroit, and we were talking about, it's like Gen AI anxiety, and then just like nonsense, and I'm tuning out. But then somebody's like, "Wait, are our juniors using this on our projects?" And nobody could answer that. And by the way, our juniors were. And they use ChatGPT for all these, for client work. And there was this silence of and it was a OMG moment of wait, what? And so I took the opportunity to castigate my fellow partners because we as a leadership team did not understand, or broadly leaders didn't understand, the partners of the firm didn't understand what juniors were doing. That's unacceptable. And to me, that's the greater risk in this. The technology is going to be what it's going to be, but it's us that are the problem.
Yeah. Would you mind sharing a little bit of the themes that you're working on in the new book?
Of course. That might turn into a lecture. So the number one theme is that we have to get good at third-party data exchange in order to drive risk and ESG. The other thing that we need to really get good at is understanding a culture of digital. So this example, this Gen AI example, how as Carney, I'll pick on Carney, how as a firm do we embrace Gen AI? Just literally yesterday, we got the notification about our policy for Gen AI. It's about 6 months too late, but sure, better late than never. Now, to be fair, we have code of conduct, and we have really smart people that are genuinely doing the right thing. So nobody was putting confidential data, I hope, out into the ChatGPT world. But that doesn't absolve us as an organization from getting better at this. And so culturally, my point here is that culturally we missed the boat on this, and we do not have a digital culture or culture of digital. And we are not enabled to try things. We put in SAP, it's good enough. That's not digital for us or for anybody. And so we are not creating this culture of digital. And more to the point, our folks are not enabled to take chances and to try things. It's like, you have a Microsoft Office, good luck. Go innovate. I'd like to see what you innovate. It's not happening. So it creates this culture of just acquiescence to the status quo, because nobody really wants to fight it. And so we all go about our business and do our own things.
So if we're thinking, I love that, and I know that you work with a lot of real customers.
I do.
That some of them use, or most of them use, the suites, or without naming any names. So
maybe I should stop.
So what do you recommend when you have this big monolith, that have a very structured data, and it's very hard to meet that as a user, whether you're an employee or a vendor or a third party. How do you bridge that gap, and what does culture has to do with it? How do you change the culture of the organization through that?
Yeah, so in those organizations, the transactional system is probably the biggest pain point. So how do we layer something like this piece of technology, this piece, and this piece, and this piece on top of that? And how do we create some wins? Mm-hmm. I think absolutely every client, maybe one or two outliers, everybody struggles with spend visibility out of those tools. Those tools were sold to give you spend visibility, and that's the one thing they all are terrible at. So you have to then start to look at, okay, let's use Cievo or Supplari or whoever else, I can't, Spend HQ. now let's just get some visibility into our spend. And so we have all these point solutions that layer on top of whatever source to pay system. Well, then we can go down the line and say, oh, you know what, that contract module is not telling me what I need. So I'm going to look at one of these others, iCertis or Ironclad or Decilo now,
CLMs.
Syrian, it's like, okay, so, and we just go down the line and we sort of identify the pain points. So it's not ripping and replacing, because that's a failed strategy, but just what can we do to create to reduce pain points in our operations. And over time you build credibility, like the team builds credibility. What I would just add a footnote to that though is, if you're a brand new CPO and you have the option, or you're building a new organization, I would say this newer generation of CPOs is not making that mistake. We buy the suite out of fear, or we historically, it's been purchased out of fear, and now we're seeing different ways, alternative ways. And
out of fear, you mean because it was like bulletproof and everybody else was doing it?
Yeah. So what's that saying? That no CIO gets fired for choosing IBM? Yeah. Well, the corollary is no CPO gets fired for choosing SAP. And so I argue this at the end of my current book is, well, you may not get fired, but you won't succeed. And so you'll leave before that bill comes due. Because I can't tell you how many CPOs come into a new role, and on the back end of a source to pay implementation that essentially failed, and so they get to pick up the pieces. And so a lot of those decisions to buy fill in the blank were fear-based, to say that of course, they're propped up by the systems integrators, the analysts, and the tech companies who are all paying each other. So they're all like promoting each other. But because I come in after the fact and I look at these benefits cases, they're wildly overstated. They're comical. And by the way, I'll throw my colleagues under the bus. Carney, we have signed off on some of those like bogus benefits claims. Like, this is nonsense. Like, what are we doing? And so all of that, I know this is a long answer, and I'm really passionate about this, but there's also now better ways. Like, when you look at what mid-tier businesses are doing, they're like, well, forget source to pay. I'll do intake and maybe payment and maybe one or two other things, and I'll just do streamline. And you see that with small, even big brands, but that are smaller in terms of revenue and size.
I think, we're seeing that a lot, that there are certain sort of like formalities within procurement that were built over the years.
Yep.
Some of them are like, heavily accepted, like POs or RFPs, where you don't always need that. It's like, it's a construct that the industry was building and built around it, and again and again and again and again. And sometimes when you're actually serving a young company that don't think in that sort of like bucket, they can start from scratch and just connect the dots without those.
Exactly. And it's silly to think some of these things. I forgot what, go ahead. Yeah.
So where do you see like the disruption starting and moving forward?
So what I love, I don't love as in it drives me bonkers, is that I see all these prompts on LinkedIn. Here's a prompt for writing an RFP. So ChatGPT wrote my RFP. It's like, I just want to beat my head against the wall, because that, like, if you could do that, well, the supplier can do that. Then what was the point of that whole exercise? So I think Gen AI actually disrupts this whole idea, these constructs of writing RFPs, of POs. Why do we have POs?
Why do we have POs? Exactly.
Because we couldn't actually get the intake or figure out what it was the user wanted. So we now go make them copy and paste, or worse, re-enter the information. So what do they do? As little as possible. So the PO tells us nothing. So like these procurement constructs are absolutely going away.
Great. So thank you very much for this great conversation. I want to open the floor for Q&A. We have another 15 minutes. So please, if you can just introduce yourself before the question, that would be great.
It got really silent.
The first one is always the
great.
hard
Thank
one.
you.
Eloise, I'd love to learn more about your book coming out in October.
So would I.
The title is secret.
Yes, it's embargoed right now, but
Okay.
yes.
You can't share.
Yeah, no, not yet.
Okay.
I can tell you what's
can
in
tell
it,
the-
but I mean, like I've told you what's in it, but yeah, it's
When can I get a copy?
probably in September. Actually, the launch event is October 11th at Digital Procurement World,
Nice.
but it'll go pre-sale and probably drop sometime in September. So, and I'll announce the title either at the end of August or in September. So.
Still working on the title.
Yes, in a manner of speaking. Also, nobody at Carney has read the book, and they're not going to read it till the end. So there's a 32% chance I'll get fired. So, so I'm navigating that. So and that's why I'm playing a little cagey.
Has nothing to do with the comments that you made here today, right?
No, I'm very on record with most of these comments. So I'll say this. Maybe we can cut this. So everybody has a perspective on resiliency. All I see is resiliency, and everybody has a solution, and Carney included. And I just look at this stuff, and I'm like, really? Like this is not resiliency. This is like a pretense to sell op model work. So, and my brain is wired this way. I'll just look at something like that, and it'll just churn in my head for weeks and weeks and months and months. And literally this resiliency one has been like 18 months, if not longer. It's just been like chewing at me, like driving me crazy. So I don't know what motivated me exactly to this. So I downloaded everybody's resiliency white papers. And yeah, you can see where this is going. And so I read them all, and they all read the same. They're all saying the same thing. And so then I took the 5 action items out of each one, and I'm like, they're all saying the same thing. And they're all advocating for an op model, which to me is not resiliency. And so then I'm like, what are we doing here? Like I challenge this idea of resiliency, because to me, if you're going to do resiliency, you got to look at disaster management and sort of building frameworks from disaster management, not op model. Because disaster management is you're going to have an event. So what do you do? So called the boom. And so I use the boom framework. So you're going to have a boom, and what do you do? Left of boom is planning activities, and right of boom is reacting. That is, to me, how you build resiliency, not like an op model. So then I went on this whole thing of pointing out the fallacy of, this is why I'll get fired, putting out the fallacy of like, telling me I need an op model does not make me any more better at planning and reacting to a boom event. But just to like drive the point home, I took all of the recommendations and I mixed them up, and I created these random 5-point plans for resiliency. And they're just, when I read it to people, it's just hilarious. I can't not laugh when reading it, because it's like, don't sole source, don't or reshore, nearshore, get good at data or something. It's like, duh, like I mean. I'll pick on Carney, but I mean, like, imagine McKinsey, Bain, BCG, Deloitte, Accenture, Carney. The hourly rate of all these people that wrote this nonsense, and the best you can come up with is reshore, and the articles are so poorly written. Like ChatGPT could write these articles better, and that's the point I make. So, so I start to tackle some of these things and deconstruct them, because it's useless. Like, why write that? Because nobody's reading that. I would argue nobody's reading that. Maybe a few CEOs are reading it, and more power to them. But a practitioner's never. I write for practitioners, and a practitioner is going to look at that, the same thing. I'm like, huh, like that's, come on.
Maybe the better question is, why pay for it?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thanks a lot for your insights today. You outline what I think, from your perspective and maybe others, is potentially intuitively obvious, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. That's wonderful. But change is very hard and slow. What is actually, do we have to wait for the 30-year-olds who understand generative AI to ascend into the C-suite? What other event needs to take place for others to actually take the necessary steps to move forward.
Yeah, so I think the big thing is and the question I always ask is it real? Because I've been talking about the excitement of startups for 6 years now. And the question that always comes back from executives, is it real? So that's a question I always ask myself. My current book has a bunch of is it real examples. My new book it's chock full of is it real, like real world pulling this in. And so that you can make that choice to say, is it real? And so there needs to be another tipping point. We are at a generational change, and we are seeing new leaders come in, not just CPOs or SCOs. We are seeing their leadership teams get very much younger and start to branch out. So I think you'll have a generational change. But I mean, when the education system is going through this catastrophic reaction to ChatGPT, negative, positive, whatever it is, it's reacting. So anybody with kids is having to deal with ChatGPT in school. So it's going to force this collective push. And I would argue that more moments like that are coming. Look, nobody wanted to talk about digital until April of 2020, when all of a sudden we couldn't go into the office. We had to get really good at virtual collaboration and sort of data exchange. So these moments will come. And by the way, as digital as we all are now, what happens when massive cyber attack takes down our internet infrastructure? Like, then we're going to have to all figure out how to go back to an analog way of working. So like these things come in cycles. But so to try to give you a more precise answer, I think we need to see examples of success. British Telecom that I featured in my current book, that's an example, and people point to them. If you watch DPW, J&J, Roche, Novartis, Coke, Mars, anyway, others are getting up on stage, Henkel, Walgreens, they're all talking about this. So they're doing it, people are doing it, and it starts to create momentum towards that. So, yeah.
Maybe a follow-up question, and full disclosure, Akeem, I work for a large enterprise company. Based on my accent, you can probably guess which one. All these companies you just mentioned are demand leaders.
Yeah.
They are consumer product companies. They are forced to do sustainability because the demand wants it, the customer wants it. Is that the secret sauce? Is that where?
Yeah, I think by and large, and the EU in particular, I mean, our Congress here won't do anything, but the EU certainly is.
The SEC?
Yeah, depends on the day. I'm not sure we have the political will here, but certainly in Europe, and it changes. And in Europe, the margins are different. Like, we have too much money here in the US. And so European companies tend to be much more efficient and drive this in a much more efficient way. So certainly, but consumer is another big one. And I think as consumer buying behavior changes, and my new book opens talking about getting a vaccine. And not to tell the whole story, but I wanted the vaccine. I got the vaccine. And I'm sitting there, I got the vaccine, and I'm sitting there and I have a paper card. This paper card is the key to my future healthcare. Come on, we can be better than that. And so when you start to unpeel that onion, that's, so, and if I'm thinking that, then we need to kind of really get better at all of this, which I know is a little bit not what you asked, but I just think there are different demand drivers. Yeah. Yes.
Last question.
So you mentioned a lot about all the startups, and I heard a question about the trend. Who's driving that trend? Is it the startups or the big guys that they're going to absorb that movement and make it mainstream at some point? So what I'm interested to see is going to be, in your opinion, how do we gauge the risk of that trend? Is it really just a wave of hype? Or is it going to be real, and what those indicators are for us?
There's a tremendous amount of hype. And so when you look at my spider map, the innovation has exploded. And when I started tracking this market in 2017. There was like 100 startups. Now there's over 4,000, and I can't keep track of them anymore. And so Carnegie partnered with ProcureTech for Lance Younger because we can't do it. I'm not going to build up a team just to track this stuff. But what's interesting is it was all venture capital funded in those early days. And now absolutely corporate venture arms are doing this, VCs, private equity's gotten into the mix, the Thoma Bravos, and now like, them acquiring Coupa is a big deal. So I think, there's so much money and investment, it's not going to stop. But what it is creating a lot of hype and a lot of frenzied activity. And that was before Gen AI. And so now you have this whole recalibration around Gen AI. And I'm going to talk in broad terms here. If you're a startup over 5 years old or a tech company, you're in trouble because you have to do a hard pivot to build your tool around Gen AI. If you're 1 to 3 years old, you can do a soft pivot and say, all right, here's Gen AI. I saw Fair Market just added Gen AI. That I saw something this morning. And it seems like every day I read somebody's adding more of it. And what it does is it cuts the barrier to entry. But if you're 0 to 1 year, and I use that sort of broadly, you're building your tool brand new on a Gen AI. Like how massive of a change is that? And that's almost dumb luck because somebody that was building a tool right before the cloud era, when cloud went mainstream, like had disadvantage when the cloud native apps started to come in. So I lost my train of thought here, but my point is that so there's going to be a contraction and then a regrowth, and I don't think any one company, SAP, Coupa, or the like, can control. This is an unharnessable market. So the question is, who's going to stitch something together and call it a win? And if you follow me long enough, you know that I think the process orchestration is the key to that, along perhaps with the data providers.
I think this is a great way to finish the conversation. Thank you very much
Yeah.
for being so generous
Thank you for having
with your
me.
time.
This was fun.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.